I'm here to talk a little bit today about loving God with all your mind, and I would like to think that God does long for us to know Him, and hopefully much more intimately than an ant can know us. Let me introduce myself. My name is Eric. My last name is Guglielmo, and because of that, a fair number of people know me as Dr. G. And in my day job, I am a physician. I work at the Spokane Eye Clinic, and I specialize in retina surgery, which means that I'm an eye surgeon, and I repair retinal detachments, and I deal with a lot of things that you hope you never have. So things like eye cancers, ocular trauma. I tell people I'm the kind of eye doctor you never want to need. Because if you're in my office, you have something bad. And if you ask me if I do LASIK, or if I'm an optometrist, I will roll my eyes at you. So, but I'm also a researcher. I participate in a number of different clinical trials at the eye clinic, researching different things on such as diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, other retina-related topics. That's a lesser part of my job, but still seems to take up a lot of time. I have really looked forward to sharing this message with you all because learning and developing your mind is something that I have always enjoyed and I'm passionate about. I remember back in the 1980s, there was this bumper sticker that people would have, and my parents thought was hilarious, and it said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." So even as a kid growing up in a non-Christian family, I knew, all right, that's not true. That can't be real. Because when you die, you don't get to keep your toys. And so I thought, well, what is it then, And I remember thinking, I was probably 8 years old, I remember thinking, it must be he who dies with the most knowledge wins. Because that's all you can take with you, I was a nerdy kid. So I know now as an adult and as a Christian that the one thing that causes you to win or lose, if you die with or without it, is, of course, the forgiveness of God offered in Jesus' sacrifice. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself so you know where I'm coming from with all this. I was raised in a secular, non-Christian family in Connecticut, in New England. And, we went to church a few times as a kid, here and there, like a lot of secular families tend to on the holidays and that sort of thing. But we were not a Christian family by any stretch of the imagination. And by the time I was in college, I declared myself to be an atheist. And I was kind of an obnoxious atheist. I would argue with Christians. I went to the University of Georgia and for my undergraduate. And the Georgia fan out there? No? All right, nice. So, I have attended a lot of other schools too. We'll get to that. But I went to the University of Georgia, right in the heart of the Bible Belt, and I would argue with people. I was quite obnoxious about it, and I had no problem arguing with Christians. I majored in English because I was a lousy student, and I thought it was easy. And at the end of that 4 years, I had a 2.87 GPA and a degree in English. I didn't know what to do with that, so I stayed on and got a master's degree. And so I got a master's degree in English education. And after 2 years of doing that, then I had to look at, oh gosh, now I actually have to get a teaching job. And I had developed, somehow in my mind, I developed this fascination with Alaska. And I'd never even been off the East Coast, but I was fascinated with, I don't know, I've been a Jack London fan when I was a kid, maybe. And so I found out that there's this job fair where in Anchorage, kind of the one big city in Alaska, where all the bush districts, the ones that are off the road system, come down and they interview at this big week-long job fair in Anchorage. And so I convinced my father to get me a ticket to go to the job fair, kind of a graduation present. He was all too happy to see me get a job. And so he got me a ticket to the job fair. I was there the whole week. I got one interview the entire week, but I got that job. And that was 1995, and the job was for the Bering Strait School District, which is where the Bering Strait reaches over to touch Russia, And It was in a little village called Elam, which is on the underside of the Bering Strait there, little Eskimo village of about 300 people. No roads in or out. They drop you off on this dirt runway in this little like two-seater plane, throw your stuff out on the dirt. The little Eskimo comes up in a four-wheeler, loads your stuff on, and drives you down into town. And in a story that I'm going to have to save for another time, it was there, in that Eskimo village, at the age of 24, that I became a Christian. Now, here's a little factoid you may not know. In 1885, when, after the United States purchased Alaska from the Russians, they had all this territory that they wanted to have, civilized. And so they carved the rural Alaska up into different chunks. And they said different missionaries from different denominations could go to the different areas. So like the Quakers got one, and different groups got to go to different chunks. Well, the Bering Strait area was given to the Evangelical Covenant Church, a Swedish denomination that had since moved to America, and they said, all right, you can have that area. So all these covenant missionaries went up to that area and created schools. And Elam was settled by some covenant missionaries who worked with an Eskimo man named Anigwin and founded that village. So the one little log cabin church in Elam, Alaska, is a covenant church like we are. I really believe that this is all part of God's plan. From the moment he put it in my head to, hey, why don't you go check out Alaska? You've never been anywhere. Why not go to Alaska? Okay. All the way up to the fact that it was a covenant church and not some other type of church, because I really think if it had been any other denomination, like if it had been Baptists or Nazarenes or Quakers or whatever, those are all good denominations, but I would have found some excuse not to listen. But the covenant is laid back in just the right areas and holds on to the truth in just the right areas. And I really believe that that's what I needed. About a year later, after becoming a Christian, I began dating Jennifer. She was the other teacher in the high school. And about 6 months after that, we got married. We are at almost 22 years now, so. After 2 more years of teaching, I began to realize that this wasn't what God had for me. I went into teaching because I just didn't know what else to do with my life. And I realized that God had something else for me. I began investigating other careers. I volunteered on the local ambulance crew and did that for a year, and then in a fit of inspiration, quit my job. Same week my oldest daughter was born, moved across the state, went back to undergraduate because I had to get all these prerequisites if I wanted to apply for anything healthcare related, like organic chemistry and physics and all that. So I was an English major. And I did that for 2 years, and it was literally like God stuck a key in my head and unlocked it. All of a sudden, here I was, a C student, and I was now getting straight A's, and not only getting straight A's, but I usually had the highest grade in the class. I applied to medical school, and I was accepted. I went to medical school at University of Nevada because they offer discounted tuition to Alaska residents. So that was 4 years. I did my 1-year general medicine internship here at Sacred Heart in Spokane. I then did 3 years of ophthalmology, which is eye surgery, at University of Oklahoma at the D. McGee Eye Institute, and then I did a 1-year retina surgery fellowship at West Virginia University. All that to say, I've got a lot of schooling. Exactly 0 of which is in theology, so take everything that I say with a grain of salt. If you total it all up, it's 17 years of post-high school education and training. But all that to say that I'm someone who still loves learning, and I'm passionate about developing this gift that God has given us called the mind. So what does it mean to love God with all of our minds? It's kind of a weird thing, isn't it, to say? I mean, you don't look at your spouse and say, no matter what happens, I'm going to love you with all my mind. You just don't say that sort of stuff. Yet a few weeks ago, Rob made the comment that we as Protestants are good at loving God with all our minds. And I think what he really meant by that was that Protestants in general, not necessarily we as the gathering house, but Protestants in general tend to shy away from other forms of loving God, like the things we've been talking about with heart and soul. And sitting in a classroom or a Bible study or something like that is comfortable, but it's also kind of passive, which is not what it's meant to be. And we're going to discuss that. But let's take a step back and talk first about why. Why to develop your mind? Why should we devote time to studying and learning in order to honor God? Why would we grow our knowledge of God, the Bible, or something else entirely, which we're going to talk about, in order to better know and serve Him? Well, I would say the reason one is because He asks it of us. Asks it of us. I'm going to pause here for just a second and just say, if you are visiting and you're not a Christian, you're not really sure what you believe, I've been there, trust me, and my message may not make a ton of sense to you. I apologize. We got no stone to throw. I mean, this is the gathering house, right? And I hope you get something out of it, but I can totally understand if it doesn't make a ton of sense. But if you are a Christian, realize that God asks us to know Him, okay? This is where I disagree with the video about the ant, because I believe that God gives us ways to know Him. But not only does He ask it of us, He longs for us to know Him. The Old Testament is filled with verses like this one, Jeremiah 9, 23 and 24, which says, "Let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, let not the mighty man boast in his might, let not the rich man boast of his riches. But let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who practices steadfast love, justice, righteousness, love, justice, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, declares the Lord." Delight. Jesus, of course, said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And He called it the greatest commandment. Peter, later in the New Testament, tells us to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. You know, Rob's comment from a few weeks ago where he said, if you love someone, meaning if you fall in love with another person, you want to spend time with them. And that's true. We want to get to know them. We want to know about them. And that not only shows our desire and our love, but it also honors them. All right? And in the same way, it honors God when we get to know Him. I would say the second reason is because it will increase your faith. You might be familiar with the story in Mark chapter 9, where a man comes to Jesus after Jesus has healed his son. And Jesus says to him, "All things are possible for those who believe." And he says, "I do believe. Help thou my unbelief." And I think we've all had this experience, right? Where we say to ourselves, "All right, I believe, but I've got all these niggling doubts and questions and things like that make me feel like sometimes I don't believe." Right? I've had this experience. I would say to you that spending time in study, getting to know God, I would argue that this is the way that you help your unbelief, because it can strengthen your faith in many different ways. For example, there's the study of apologetics, right? Apologetics, if you've heard that term, is the branch of theology that deals with defending the faith from objections, basically. And 1 Peter 3:15 says, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But," and I love this but, "do this with gentleness and respect." That part often gets left out, it seems like. I'm doing okay on time, so I'm going to tell you a story. I'm 21 years old. I'm at the University of Georgia. I'm walking through the Student Center. At the Student Center at University of Georgia, there is a platform, not unlike this one, called the Free Speech Platform. And anybody can stand up there and spout off anything they want, okay? So, growing up in Connecticut, I had never seen anything like this, but there are, every few months or so, there's some crazy religious nut job that stands up on the stage and literally, basically preaches a sermon where he's insulting people that are walking by. Of course, I had long hair at the time. I had earrings at the time. I gave that crowd a wide berth because I didn't want him to yell at me. And then people would yell at him and hiss and boo and all that sort of stuff, and it created quite the spectacle. And I was like, wow, this stuff is for real. I thought this was just in the movies. But anyway, one day, I'm 21, I'm probably a senior, so I'm walking through the Free Speech Center, and I see there's a crowd over there around the platform. And I'm like, it's probably 3 times the size it normally is. And I kind of look over there like, what is that? And the guy's preaching is not up on the platform. He's down on the ground with everybody else. He has one of these things on, and he's got a couple of speakers there so everybody can hear him. And he's basically just answering questions. And he's doing it in a very kind, respectful tone, admitting, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. And he's answering any hard question the students will throw at him. What about all the people who died before they heard about Jesus? What about homosexuality? What about this? What about that? And he's giving very kind, very respectful answers, quoting scripture. And that is the first time I ever stopped and listened. And as I'm standing there watching this guy, I look around the crowd, which, like I said, is quite a bit larger than it normally is. And I see other people in the crowd that I know they're not Christians. I know what kind of a lifestyle they lead. And they're listening too. And I thought, maybe this guy's got something. All that to say that the moral of the story is that even though we can study a lot of this stuff, which unfortunately we can't get into the specifics of it today, I just wanted to remind people about the gentleness and respect portion, because a lot of times if you do have discussions with non-believers or whatever, they will not remember what you said, but they will remember how you said it. So, another way you can strengthen your faith and decrease your doubts is to, study questions like secondary doctrine. This is something that didn't bother me for the first 15 years I was a Christian, and then it started to bother me a lot. A lot of Christians get wrapped up into issues that deal with like Calvinism versus Arminianism, or once saved, always saved, or how strict do we have to be about tithing, or the permissibility of alcohol, and all kinds of different secondary doctrine issues. And really, I'll be honest, the only way to really answer that is to study that for yourself, So depending on what the doubts and such that you have, trust me, there's stuff out there that will help you to answer those questions, and I encourage you to look into that. And I just want to take a moment to say that I really appreciate the Covenant Church's stance on this. I came most recently, before I came to this Covenant Church, I came more recently from a different church, not Covenant, that had really strong stances on some secondary doctrine issues that I really disagreed with. And, the Covenant says we do have stances, and they don't compromise the truth, but they focus on what unites us rather than on what divides us. And I love that. The third reason that you might consider developing your mind in order to know and honor God is to increase wisdom. This is a nice little side Benny of studying the Bible. Josh isn't here today, who spoke last week, but I was going to give him a hard time about playing Dungeons and Dragons and the difference between intelligence and wisdom, because they have to design all their little characters and give them numbers and that sort of thing. And he had a rousing discussion with my oldest daughter about all that stuff when he was over at our house eating dinner. But I think all of you know that there's a difference between intelligence, which is your ability to learn and memorize facts and information, and wisdom, which is your ability to make good choices. All right? Smart people make dumb choices all the time. This is what Forrest Gump said, right? Stupid is as stupid does. The amount of intelligence you have is probably pretty static, we can beef it up, we can develop it, but really each one of us is given that. The amount of wisdom you have can be increased. And studying the Bible is a great way to begin that. The book of Proverbs opens with the statement that this book is, quote, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight. And a few verses later, it gives the famous verse, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And really what they meant in the Hebrew was knowing God, knowing the Lord. That's where wisdom starts. And then the rest of the Proverbs has tons of verses on wisdom and good choice making and all that sort of stuff, but a lot of it won't make sense unless your foundation is knowing God. So in wrapping up this concept of why would we want to develop our minds to love God, I would submit to you that the process of getting to know God can be a uniquely wonderful experience unlike any other, filled with sort of aha moments that you can remember for the rest of your life. I want to give you an example from my own. So I became a Christian at 24, right? And like most people who are non-Christians, I thought I knew the Bible. Hey, I was an English major, right? I mean, we had to like read parts of the Bible, so I must know it. I didn't know the Bible. So I was reading at one point, and I decided that, let me take a step back. I wanted to know the meaning of the word Israel. Like, what did that word mean originally? I would have thought that it meant something like God's holy chosen nation, you know, God's favored people. But it doesn't. And I looked it up, and do you know what Israel means? It means struggles with God. Yeah. Now, if I was naming my nation, I wouldn't name it that. All right? I would name it, you know, we are, you know, the favored people of God or something like that. But no, it comes from the story where Jacob, who, you know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob met God, an avatar of God, you know, on the road there. And as he was going back to see his brother Esau, and God said, come at me. And he did. And they wrestled all night. And in the end, God touched Jacob's hip, and he crippled him partially, and he said, now on, you're going to be called Israel, because you struggled with God. And now their nation is named that, meaning, geez, for the rest of time, you're going to struggle with God. And I learned that, and I thought, whoa, me too. You know, I struggle with God too. Another one was when I first looked up the meaning of the word Satan. The book of Job is the first place it gets mentioned, right? And Job is about, you know, a third or so of the way into the Bible, but it's thought to be possibly the first of them that was written chronologically. And it's set back in the time of Abraham and the patriarchs. And Job, in the very first chapter, you got God on the throne, all the angels are sitting around, and this guy shows up. Satan. And I thought, that word had a meaning. Like, what did that word mean? I looked it up. You know what it means? It means the accuser. That's what it meant. In the, you know, if you read this in Hebrew, it says, and then the accuser showed up. Light bulb moment. I was like, whoa. As a relatively new Christian, I'm thinking, so you mean that all this time, the person who's been pointing their finger at me, saying, you're not good enough, you know, like the guy on the stage, you know, you got long hair and earrings and whatever, you do this, you do that. All that shame, that wasn't coming from God? Because I always thought it was coming from God. It wasn't coming from God. God loves us and longs for us to know him. Of course, all this can be taken too far, you know. We bring up the image of the dry, dusty, puritanic, or academic-only relationship with God. And that's why we need to embrace some of these other areas that we've been talking about. It can also make us prideful. You know, I think that people who have a lot of knowledge, a lot of intelligence can be very, very prideful. However, I really believe that when Jesus told us to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, he did it. He said it in that order, and he did it on purpose. What I mean by this is the heart comes first, right? When we originally come to faith, most of us, it's usually a heart decision. We realize that God loves us, God is real, and he longs to forgive us. And we're overwhelmed with gratitude and the release of that forgiveness. Later on comes the mind aspect, the studying and the learning. Very few people actually think their way to faith. Just real quickly, people often think that Christians can't be scientific or shy away from science or something along those lines. We get accused of that all the time, right? Usually by people who have less scientific training than I do. And I would just like to interject that, again, could be a talk for another time, but you know, all the knowledge that I have gained of science, and I love studying the biological sciences and science in general, all of that knowledge has not decreased my faith one iota. If anything, it has strengthened my faith. I think all my science knowledge raises way more questions about atheism than it does about Christianity. Again, I wish I could go deeper into that, but I can't. So let's move on to how. How do we develop our minds for God? What can we actually do to develop them? And how do we grow our knowledge and our wisdom in order to both know God and to honor God? I would start by submitting that the essential experience of loving God with all your mind is the act of learning more about God and learning to know God. Because as A.W. Tozer, a well-known theologian, said in his famous book, Knowing God, quote, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." If you think about it, if God is real, that's probably true. And getting to know God, learning more about God, can take several forms. It can be individual quiet time for study and prayer. Not just study and prayer, but study and enjoying the presence of God simultaneously. This is something that I don't do enough of. A lot of us don't. And I think it's one of the most important things that we should do as Christians, is a regular, quiet time, study time, where we not just learn, but we also enjoy the presence of God. And I've recently been convicted that, you know what, I've laxed off. I haven't done this in a long time. I need to start doing it again. So it's something that I've just recently started myself. And it's tough. I know it can be tough to find the time, but if there's one thing I could convince you to do today, that would probably be it. It would be to increase your personal quiet times with God. I'll be honest with you, I'm not the kind of guy that can just sit there and read the Bible. I've read the whole Bible through, with the exception of some of the longer Old Testament parts. And I have a hard time just rereading it. So I have what I call my two-book method, and you're welcome to steal this. I have whatever book I want to read. Right now I'm reading the Ragamuffin Gospel by Brennan Manning. Not the most intellectual work, but something I needed to read. And then I have my Bible, my NIV study Bible, open next to it. And whenever there's verses or whatever, I will, I'm reading the book, and then I'll look it up in the verse, and then I will maybe read the NIV text note. Maybe that will bring up another question, and then I'll get back to this. But more importantly, I'm using that time to ask God to open my mind and teach me. And like I said, it's something I wish I had done more of in my walk as a Christian. But if I can convince you to do anything this week, it would be to spend an hour in that type of stuff. I wanted to give a shout out to the people who use this time for verse memorization. I've been blown away by, I'm not a memorizer. I wasn't a memorizer in medical school. I'm not a memorizer now. I've tried to memorize verses, large chunks of them, but I cannot. I remember, I'd been a Christian maybe a year or two, and we were up in Nome, Alaska, which is near Elam, and out on the tip of the Bering Strait. And did you know the Covenant Church has a radio station out there on the tip of the Bering Strait? So it's called KICY. Get it? ICY, IC, get it? Alaska? Yeah, right. So it's called KICY, and they broadcast Christian radio to the entire western portion of Alaska, as well as into Russia, and at night it's in Russian. And a friend of ours was a missionary there, meaning he was working at the radio station. And he and I were talking one night over dinner, and he's like, yeah, I've been trying to memorize 1 Peter. I said, what? Like what verse in 1 Peter? No, the whole book. Oh, okay. You memorize the whole book of 1 Peter? Like, okay. I can't do it, but I'm amazed at people who can. And my kids did Awana. I don't know if you've heard of Awana. It's a program for kids where they memorize Bible verses. They memorized tons of verses. I was blown away by the stuff they could do. Beyond individual quiet times, though, The next step would probably be small group Bible study. You know, we have our gathering groups and Bible studies here that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then, of course, there's outside resources on that as well, like Bible study fellowship, that sort of thing. Another method might be discipleship. This is a dying tradition in our society, and something that I really believe that we desperately need. I mean, so many stories of people who did great things for God, they begin with a story of how that person was discipled by somebody else. And we leave that part out a lot. And it's something that I really feel like, you know, there's so many young people, as well as just young Christians, that are in need of one-on-one mentoring in order to take their faith to the next level so they can become the next generation of leaders. And I think that's a powerful way to develop your mind. Of course, there's numerous other ways, right? There's seminary classes, online Bible studies, video series, vast arrays of subjects. In the 21st century, information is not the problem, right? Prioritization is the problem. Lastly, I'd just like to say that it's not just about Bible knowledge. There may be ways that God asks you to develop your mind that have nothing to do with the Bible. For example, if you're someone like me, knowledge of your craft, or whatever it is that you do. If people know I'm a Christian and a surgeon, and yet I do sloppy work, what kind of a witness is that for Christ? I want to tell you a story here real quick. When I was in training, I went to University of Oklahoma for my ophthalmology training. This was, where I've already done all my general medical training. Now I'm going to train for 3 years at the Dean McGee Eye Institute in Oklahoma City, one of the largest eye institutes in the nation, to learn how to do eye surgery, okay? I went there because it's Oklahoma, big Christian environment. Several of the faculty claim to be Christian. In fact, they even have the president of the Christian Ophthalmology Society is on staff there. The last 2 presidents are on staff there. I thought, yes, I'm going to go into this nice, nurturing Christian environment, and I'm going to learn to be a Christian surgeon and pray with patients and all this cool stuff. Not, okay? So there was this doctor. Let's call him Dr. R, okay? Dr. R was a devout Christian, but he had a very different view of what it meant to be a Christian doctor than I did. A lot of us like to think that Christians should be kind, love your neighbor as yourself, that sort of thing. Not this guy. His version of being a Christian doctor was, it was his responsibility to make you into the most excellent physician you could be. And he rode me like a rented mule. He would, I mean, you guys have seen Scrubs, right? Or Grey's Anatomy, or one of these other doctor shows. He would chew me out in public, humiliating me in front of patients, in front of staff members, other residents, regularly. And, it would drive me crazy. And he'd give me more work than I could handle. I'd be up all night trying to do whatever it was he'd asked me to do. I'm already a resident, right? So they're working you like a slave. And, you're on call every 4th night, up all night, in clinic all day for 10, 12 hours a day. Then you've got lectures at night and in the morning. And it's a tough life. And then to have him on top of it, riding my behind, was not what I thought of as a nurturing Christian environment. It was harsh. But you know what? To some degree, maybe I needed a butt kicking, I think that because of him, I did gain a level of excellence that I would not have gained otherwise. All that to say that if you are not just a doctor, but a number of different things, if you're an auto mechanic, if you're a plumber, if you're an attorney, an accountant, whatever, and people know you're a Christian, they're going to judge you and ultimately your faith if you habitually do a sloppy job. So I do believe that God calls us to excellence in those things. Sorry. But this isn't the real reason that God asks us to develop excellence in our field. For the answer to this, we're going to look to briefly Luke 19. Can you hand me that Bible I bookmarked over there? It's on page 717 here in the blue and white Bible. Oh, my bookmark is gone. Luke chapter 19, this is called the parable of the talents. And you know what? I've often thought to myself that this is one of the most fascinating and, to be honest, frightening parables that Jesus told. You can find it in both Luke or Mark. I kind of prefer Luke because Luke was a doctor. Just to paraphrase the first part of the story, you got a rich man. He's going to go away for a certain amount of time. And he has these things that are called in different parts of the Bible, depending on your translation. Sometimes they're called talents. A talent was a chunk of gold, right? It's maybe 75 pounds, something like that. In Luke, they call it a minos, and that is about 3 months' wages. So in different places, they use different amounts of money. But he gives some, he got 3 servants, he gives some to each. Servant 1, when he comes back a few months later, servant 1 has invested that, and he has created 10 times as much. Servant 2 invested it, created 5 times as much. Servant 3 went and hid it under a rock, right? He buried it or put it in some cloth, that sort of thing. And he said, look, I saved it for you. I got it. It's right here. See? But he didn't do anything with it. And it's interesting because in modern translations, a lot of times, like in Matthew, it'll say, instead of talents, it'll say bags of gold so that it doesn't confuse the issue. But I love that they use the word talents because of the obvious parallel to the way we have taken that word and used it to mean the inherent gifts that we're given by God. So, starting at verse 20, this is when, after he has heard from the first 2 servants, now the 3rd servant is going to talk. Then another servant came and said, Sir, here is your mina. I've kept it and laid it away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow. His master replied, All right, fine. Then I will judge you by your own words. You wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I'm a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow? By the way, up until this point, he didn't sound all that harsh. The master sounded pretty generous. But the guy called him harsh, and he said, fine, if you think I'm harsh, I'll show you harsh. Why then didn't you at least put it on deposit, meaning in the bank, so that when I came back, I could have collected it with some interest? Then he said to those standing by, take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10. And the point that Jesus was trying to make was that the mina represents the gospel, and we're to share it with other people and hopefully get other people into heaven. And all of this might sound harsh as you're reading the parable. And like I said, it does frighten me sometimes when I read it. But keep in mind that the talents, or the minas or whatever, but these talents were loaned to the servants. And just like all the gifts we've been given, whether it's intelligence, musical talent, or just the ability to listen emphatically to somebody, God asks us to develop that talent and to use it to spread the good news. And ultimately to get more people into heaven. Doing otherwise is burying our talent. And the first talent each of us was given was our minds. Every one of us has one. Except maybe my kids. I'm just kidding. Just seeing if you're paying attention. My daughter Maria yesterday spent the day taking the SAT molecular biology section test for her application to Harvard. Hey, Rob gets to brag on his kids from the pulpit, right? So, cut me some slack. I could go on. There's numerous other areas. The intersection of science and faith, to answer questions about evolution or the origin of the universe, ethics and how modern day situations, scientific or otherwise, how does that intersect with faith? All of these are areas that we could study in addition to learning Bible knowledge, right? Chris and I had a rousing discussion earlier this morning about stem cells, embryonic and adult stem cells, and what are the ethics behind that, as well as euthanasia. And those are great things to study and learn about to answer your questions and other people's that don't involve directly studying the Bible, maybe tangentially, but those are all different ways that God might ask us to be ready to have an answer. That make sense? All right, so I gotta speed up. So what does that look like for the Gathering House? What does it look like for us in our four walls, now and in the future, with the people we have here? What does it look like for us to commit to developing our minds, to love God with our minds? Well, we have a couple things going for us already. There's Rob's sermons, for example. One of the things I really appreciate about Rob is that he incorporates a lot of teaching into his preaching. I've been in too many churches where the pastor just seems like he's stuck in a rut. Godly men, well-meaning men, that just, seem like they're stuck in a rut, and all the sermons begin to sound the same. And after 2 or 3 years, you're like, all right, I've heard it all. And then when I came here and I started hearing all this history and the context and that sort of thing, I was like, yes, I can get into that. There are people who say that if all you do is come to church and just sit your butt in the seat and do nothing else, then you're not going to develop your mind. And there's some truth to that. But if I work this into my schedule every week, at least I know I'm going to get 45 minutes of solid Bible teaching every week. And that'll keep me from standing still. But it's probably the absolute minimum. So what comes next? Well, there's the gathering groups and the Bible studies that we talked about, right? I think we got 6 of them now, and hopefully growing more. Mike Montang, where are you, Mike? There he is, right over there. He's our small group leader, and that'd be a great person to talk to if you want to get involved in that. I hear Dan is a great teacher, and is somebody that could help you with your learning. My own wife, Jennifer, has a women's Bible study here, 10 o'clock on Monday mornings. Here's an idea. What about starting a gathering group? Is there an area you'd like to know more about? History, archaeology of the Holy Land, science, biblical money management principles like those taught by Larry Burkett and Crown Financial Ministries. I bet there is a video series on it. And why not say, hey, we're going to get together, we're going to watch this 20-minute video, and we're going to talk about it afterwards. And if you're looking for something like that, I'll bet Mike can help you find it. That same Dr. R, by the way, my chief resident year, so my final year at that I Institute, he came to me and he said, I think you should start a Bible study for the other residents. I was like, what? Like, you're not working me hard enough as it is. But that's exactly what I did. I prayed about it, and I felt like God wanted me to do it. And I got this video series, little 20-minute videos, put out by a Christian Medical and Dental Association called Just Add Water. And I invited the other residents, and I said, hey, we're going to watch this from every other Friday morning from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. And then we're going to talk about it for the remainder of the hour. And I'm like, nobody shows up? Fine. I watched the video myself, Almost every resident came. I couldn't believe it, yeah. So, there's only 9 of us, but I was blown away. Like, I didn't think anybody was going to come. But I did it for 6 or 8 weeks, and almost everybody came. If, in addition to that, we have other periodic workshops, the hit and run things, like the membership class, which is 2 nights, spiritual gifts class that Rob teaches that I've wanted to attend, but haven't had a chance. But I hear it's really good. Pete, is Pete here? No? Pete has taught several of these little 6-week hit and runs. I've gone to a couple of them, like on Wednesday nights. They do like a little 6-week thing. They're really good. For the future, what does it look like? Well, we've talked about things like having guest speakers come in. Rob was talking with me the other day about doing these video podcasts up here where we would interview different people about different, social topics and that sort of thing, and then that'd be available on YouTube. Thought that would be pretty cool. Here's an idea I had. What if as we grow, we're going to need more help, right? We're going to need maybe more pastors. What if we were to train up our own future pastors and fund their way to seminary and have them come back and work with us. You know? I know other churches have done that. Personally, I was trying to brainstorm for other ideas beyond like the normal things we've talked about. Things like, I came up with two things that I would really like to see. Number one, I would love to see a discipleship program. You know, something where older men and women in the church work to mentor those who are younger or less experienced in the faith. I think it would produce awesome results. The other thing I was thinking of was a library. You know, I mean, it's a coffee shop, right? What goes better with coffee than books? And so I think that if we had that here, that would be kind of a cool thing. You know, either in the back or maybe, I don't know, out there, some shelves of books. We had a library in our church in West Virginia, and it was a really neat little place to gather. So in closing, Jesus said, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, or to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. In James it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. I hope that this week you'll be encouraged to crack open that book that you've been meaning to read. And spend some time with your Bible open and enjoy the presence of Jesus while learning about Jesus. Or maybe that you finally take the time to check out that small group or Bible study that you've been meaning to attend. While you're doing those things, I hope that you will dream of ways that we together might honor God by developing our minds in the future, and how you might be involved in that. And lastly, on the subject of developing your mind, I'd like to leave you with this quote by someone much smarter than me. It's C.S. Lewis. And this concept has been so important to me as a physician and a scientist, and I think you'll see what it means. He said that, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. Let's close in prayer, and then I'll let you go. Dear Father in heaven, just thank you for this time. Thank you for each and every member here at the Gathering House, those that could be here today and for those that couldn't. Lord, I just pray that as we look to ways that we as a church can honor you by loving you with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbors as ourselves, I just pray that you would inspire us with your Holy Spirit, that you would let us know which ways would be the ways to go to really see that bear fruit. And as we look to developing our minds specifically, I pray that you give us a passion for learning, a passion for knowing you, and for knowing the things about this world that would help us to spread your gospel, to spread the good news, and to bring more people to know you. We just pray all that in Jesus' name. Amen.